Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're doing something a little different. We're diving into a single, incredibly detailed biography of Donald Trump. But here's the twist. It's written from a future perspective. Our job is to break down its entire narrative for you visually. So let's just start with a number. 4,000 plus. According to the source material we're looking at, that's roughly how many state and federal legal actions Donald Trump and his businesses have been tangled up in over just 3 decades. Right from the get-go, it paints a picture of a career that's, well, let's just say it's been pretty defined by legal fights. So like I said, our guide for this entire explainer is this one comprehensive document. And its unique, future-dated perspective gives us this complete story, start to finish. So let's dive in and see how this account says it all began, right back in New York. All right, so Section 1, the making of a brand. This is all about how he went from being an heir to a tycoon. The story kicks off in New York City, where the whole idea was to take his father's company and turn it into this global brand, something that just screamed wealth. Okay, so you look at this timeline, and it seems like a pretty standard path, right? Wharton grad, takes over the family business, but the source we're using points out something that kind of changes the whole picture. It says that thanks to his dad's real estate empire, he was actually a millionaire by the time he was 8 years old. In today's dollars, the total amount he'd eventually get from his father's company, something like $413 million. And you can see how that context is just absolutely crucial for understanding how the brand was built. Now, the source really paints this picture of a career built on huge, high-stakes gambles. For every massive success like Trump Tower, there was let's call it a significant failure. The Atlantic City casinos are the perfect example. Look at the Taj Mahal here, super opulent, but just drowning in debt. This led to 6 of his businesses filing for bankruptcy protection. That's a big deal. And in the 90s, things got really dicey. His whole empire was teetering on the edge of personal collapse. So you have to ask, why did the banks decide to restructure his debt instead of letting him go under? Well, according to one of the lead bank lawyers at the time, the thinking was pretty blunt. They all agreed that he'd be better alive than dead. It wasn't about anything other than a cold, hard business calculation that ended up saving him from personal bankruptcy. Okay, so after all that financial chaos in the 90s, the Trump brand was in serious need of a reboot. And the thing that was going to do it, well, it wasn't another skyscraper. It was a reality TV show, a show that would basically project this new and improved image of him directly into millions and millions of living rooms every single week. And that show, of course, was The Apprentice. Our source singles this out as maybe the most critical piece of the puzzle in remaking his public image. For more than 10 years, the show presented what the document calls a highly flattering, highly fictionalized version of himself. The ultimate tough but fair CEO who had all the answers. And wow, was it good for the bottom line? It wasn't just about optics. The source claims he made more than $400 million from the show and all the licensing that went with it. That kind of money really helped cement that public image of him as this wildly successful billionaire, and it kind of pushed all those stories about his earlier business failures way, way into the background. So at this point, his fame is its own kind of currency. It's literally cemented into the sidewalk on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And it was exactly this capital, the celebrity power, that he was about to leverage for his most ambitious move yet, a full-on pivot into politics. Which brings us to his first presidency. He ran as a complete political outsider, and his 2016 win, well, it wasn't just an entry into national politics, it was a total disruption. So what did that presidency look like, according to our source? It's described as a time of really sweeping policy changes. The highlights include things like a travel ban, expanding the border wall, a major tax cut. He also appointed 3 Supreme Court justices, pulled the U.S. out of the Paris Climate Agreement, and kicked off a trade war with China. The focus was really on rolling back regulations and shaking up the status quo, both at home and abroad. And this slide, I think, really nails the point the source makes about his unconventional approach to foreign policy. On the left, you've got the very formal, traditional G7 summit with all the usual allies. And on the right, a much more personal, one-on-one meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. It just perfectly illustrates that preference for personal deals over old-school institutional diplomacy. The source also spends a lot of time on his communication style, which was a huge break from tradition. Just look at this chart. According to accounts cited in the document, he made over 30,000 false or misleading claims while in office. The sheer volume of it.
I mean, you can see how it ramped up over time. The source just flat out calls it unprecedented in American politics.
Okay, so that brings us to the period after his first term. This whole era, as described in the source, was really dominated by two things: the attempt to overturn the 2020 election and just a tidal wave of legal problems. The document goes into a lot of detail about his challenges to the 2020 election results, and it all came to a head on January 6th, 2021, with the attack on the U.S. Capitol. This image shows his supporters marching on the building after a rally where, the source notes, he told them to fight like hell. So, the fallout from January 6th was massive. It led to his second impeachment and really just opened the floodgates to all sorts of legal trouble. One of the biggest, which you can see evidence from right here, was the federal indictment related to classified documents found at his Mar-a-Lago residence. The key takeaway from the source is that after he left office, the main stage for his story really became the courtroom. All right, and this is where things get really interesting. This is the part of the source material that makes it so unique. It doesn't just stop. It actually lays out a detailed narrative of what a second term would look like. Okay, so it is absolutely vital to be clear here. Everything we're about to talk about is the scenario projected by our source document. Remember, it's written from a future date, January 10th, 2026 to be exact, looking back on these events. So this is the story as told by this specific document. So what does this projected second term look like? According to the source, it's defined by a massive expansion of presidential power. We're talking about things like granting clemency to everyone involved in January 6th, mass layoffs of federal workers, using the Justice Department to go after political opponents, and even sending the military into Democratic-run cities. As you can imagine, the source says these actions were met with hundreds of lawsuits. So, after all of that, what does this biography say is the lasting political legacy? What's the ism that's left behind? Well, the source calls it Trumpism, and it's defined as a right-wing populist movement. The whole thing is built on an us versus them narrative, tough anti-immigrant rhetoric, and a big focus on expanding the power of the president. The document argues it fundamentally changed the Republican Party, taking ideas that used to be on the far-right fringe and making them part of the mainstream conversation. So there you have it. That's the narrative laid out in this one particular source. It takes us all the way from a New York real estate heir to a reality TV phenom, and finally to a political figure who, in this telling, completely reshapes the American presidency. And it leaves us with this final question to think about. What does this whole story, as it's told here, suggest about the powerful forces of branding, controversy, and politics in the 21st century?